All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cooking with Kole. My name is Allison Carmola, and I'm a librarian at the Beatley Central Library. We'd like to welcome you to our first Cooking with Kole of the new year. And Kole, if you'd like to take it away.
Fantastic. Yeah. Happy New Year's, you guys, and happy Saturday. I thought I would share a recipe with you since it's still fairly chilly out. That's really comforting and warming and also really simple. Today, we are making more food on the Japanese spectrum side of things. We're making a traditional shoyu ramen. We're also doing a really simple miso soup and one of my favorite ways to prepare edamame. And so, per usual, there's lots of moving parts. And if you can see behind me, I have actually every burner on my stovetop is like occupied by some pan in some capacity. What is happening right now behind me is in this big one right here. I have a whole quart of stock. So you can use a veggie stock or chicken works really well. I'd probably stay away from beef. And this is what is going to be sort of the base of our ramen. And then right behind that, I also have just a quart of water and another one. And so what I've done to both of these is I've just brought them up to a boil. And then once I saw the boil happening, I immediately lowered the temperature to the lowest setting on my stove so that they're just maintaining a really nice, simple, even heat. And then also back here, these pans are warm so we can move through these steps and these recipes fairly quickly. But on this back one, I have about 4 tablespoons of avocado oil at just like a low temperature, but we're going to use that to make an aromatic oil that is really important for when you go to make a simple ramen. And so we have a whole bunch of ingredients today, and I tried to keep it not too eclectic and stuff that you could get really simply at your grocery store. But per usual, we also have this camera here so you can see how I'm preparing and chopping these ingredients here. And always make sure that your cutting board is secure. You can use a damp paper towel or a silicone heat resistant pad, just so that your cutting board is like shifting when you're chopping and cutting. So what we're going to start off with right away is I have a cup of vegetable stock. You can also use chicken stock or any of the stocks that I mentioned. I'm going to add this to the pot behind me that has a quart of just water in it. And so what this does, that the water and this cup of stock is going to help flavor our miso. And I'll go in a little bit later, more into detail on what goes into a miso and how incredibly simple it is. But I'm going to go ahead and just pour that in there right now. And then to both of these, I'm also going to be adding some shiitake mushroom. And I believe I wasn't sure if it was my last class or one before that, but I really like shiitake mushroom because it has a really robust and it brings out a robust flavor and also brings out this umami component. And if you're unfamiliar with umami, it's really prevalent in Japanese cooking, but it's sort of like this thick flavor profile that it tastes savory, but it's not salty in that way. It's this very unique flavor and often comes from the amino acid glutamine that is in umami heavy foods, like seaweed, which is also going to be in our ramen, but also shiitake mushroom. And for some reason, I have had like a really hard time finding shiitake mushroom lately in the grocery stores. I went to 3 grocery stores and I couldn't find any fresh ones, which is totally fine. And so instead, I'm using dried shiitake mushroom. And this is actually probably potentially fine. So it's just all the moisture is dehydrated out of it, and you can reanimate them just by placing them in warm broth or water, or in this case, broth. And all of that flavor is still going to be there. And sometimes it's nice too, because if you don't use all the mushrooms, these store, or fresh mushrooms, these store really well because they're dried. You still want to store them in the fridge, but they're a little bit more forgiving. And so to both of those pans behind me, I'm just going to do a really small handful into both. I think this is roughly, oh gosh, 8 or so. You can kind of eyeball it. If you know that you like sort of a mushroomy flavor, you can add more. If you know that you don't, feel free to not use as much. So I'm going to do this handful. in the big pot that has just the broth, the stock in it. And I'm going to do a little bit of a smaller one for the miso broth. Awesome. And those are just going to hang out and they'll reconstitute and they'll get all nice and flavorful, and all of those flavors will meld together, which is exactly what we want. The next step that we need to do is we need to make an aromatic oil. And a lot of times this is the oil when you go to a ramen restaurant that hangs out and floats on the top of your ramen broth. And it's really aromatic. It tastes really fantastic. It adds a whole level to it. And so it's fairly simple to make. I just have a ginger root here that I chopped. And if you're unfamiliar with what ginger looks like, it's that gnarly root that you see at the grocery store. And I just chopped the skin off, and we're not going to use this whole thing. I'm probably going to use only half. And so that's probably about a 1/2 inch worth. So I'm going to chop that in half now. And I'm just going to create these little slices of the ginger. And the tricky thing about ginger is it's a really fibrous root. It's like fairly dense, and there's all of these intense, almost like bristly compounds in it. And it's kind of tough to chop, harder than a carrot or even a sweet potato. And you know what? I'm actually going to do a little bit more. I really like ginger. If that flavor is not as favorable to you, you don't have to use as much. But also when you're using fresh ginger, if you've never had it, it kind of has like a spicy compound to it. It's a bold flavor for sure. But we're keeping these in slices because we're actually going to strain them out of the oil and give them a toss later. So I'm going to take this handful and I'm going to put it in that about 4 tablespoons of avocado oil behind me. I'm going to turn up the temperature just a little bit so we can keep going. And so I also have over here, what's going to go into that is a whole bunch or half of a bunch of green onions. And so I'm going to kind of do these in batches. And so the thing that you want most in this aromatic oil is more so the white parts, which is where you get that really sort of oniony flavor from. So I'm just going to chop off the ends, give them a toss, and just really simple, easy slices here. Oops, we got one that just rolled away. That's fine. And you know what I'm actually am probably going to do? I'm going to save the greens just to garnish it with later for both the miso and the ramen. And I think I'm just going to do these white parts just to make sure I'm getting all of the flavor that I possibly can into this aromatic oil. So you can probably see I'm adjusting the temperature back there because I'm hearing a light sizzle on the ginger already. And so we're not trying to crisp these at all. All we're trying to do is maintain a fairly warm temperature so that all of the volatile and oil compounds can steep out of the ginger and also this onion here and infuse it into the oil. So you don't want it too high. We're not trying to cook these by any means. We're just trying to kind of let everything hang out and mesh together. So I'm going to add these to the oil as well. And they can hang out there for quite a while. You just want to keep an eye on it, that it's not like simmering or sauteing too much. If it's getting overly crispy, you know it's way too high. So right now the temperature is just like at a medium low. On my adjustable burner setting, it's at a 2 right now. Cool. So those are just going to hang out, and I'll give these a chop in just a little bit. I'm going to set them off to the side. The next thing that I want to do is get started on my edamame. And so what we're going to do for that is you can use avocado oil, any sort of medium heat oil. I'm today just going to use a little bit of olive oil. I'm probably using a tablespoon or two. And I'm just going to eyeball it into here, into this other pan. That's plenty. And then into that, right now, I'm going to add in about 2 cloves of minced garlic. And I did this before class. And we're just going to create a really nice, even sort of brown coating and crispiness to the garlic. Give it a light mix just so that the oil coats everything and we can get moving fairly simply here. All right, that looks good. So while that's starting to cook and brown, I'm going to prep the rest of my ingredients for the ramen. And so you want a fairly sturdy and big bowl here. I think this is just an 8-inch by 4 inches. It's fairly deep. And the reason I like a bigger bowl is we're going to load this with different kinds of noodles and veggies, and we're also going to add in an egg. And so what I like to do first is in the base of my bowl, you want to grate, I don't know, probably about like a little bit less than a 1/4 of a teaspoon of fresh ginger. And so if you don't have one of these things, it's totally fine. This is a ginger grater. It's used for really dense roots. This is also the ingredient or the grater that they use for wasabi. And traditional wasabi is a root, and they mash it on here so it forms sort of this paste. And I don't know if you can see, I'll try to show this camera over here. I've already used it, but there are these little nubs here that just help to pull out and work with those really dense fibers of the ginger root. And you don't need this. If you don't have it, what you can do is do those same little slices that we did when we're making the aromatic oil. And then you're just going to try to chop that as finely as you can. It might take, a few minutes, but that's totally fine. It doesn't need to be like a puree by any means, but I find that the finer texture, the better. Because if you get like a chunk of ginger in your ramen, it's just not always texturally like fun to crunch on. So all I'm gonna do is you just rub it on these little fibers, or these nubs, I should say. And hopefully you can see from that camera. But then what starts to form is some of this paste, and it's kind of cool. And so you have to use a little bit of pressure just to get it moving, but the nubs are fairly sturdy. I believe this is made from steel, so you can get pretty aggressive with it. I once tried to do this with a citrus zester, and it doesn't work as well. And I found that I dulled the zesting mechanism in my zester, and so I ultimately bought this. I think I got it for like $5 on Amazon. And so if you like cooking with Asian food and you like the flavor of ginger, even if you like making Thai food, this is just sort of a fun little tool to add to your kitchen. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add this to this big bowl here. And I really like ginger, so that whole thing is going in there. And I'll show you how much I use. I would say that for like if you're not as into ginger, I'd probably use half that amount. So I'll set these off to the side as well. Now check my garlic. We're doing all right. I'm giving this a stir again. It's smelling really good in here. All right, looks good. So the next step that I'm gonna do is I'm going to chop up the rest of these guys so that we can use it to top our miso and the ramen. And it's just the same texture and size as before. The thinner, the better, I find. That way, you don't get like a giant piece of green onion to chomp on. I probably don't even need all of these, to be honest. And so what I'm doing, I'm not going straight down with my knife. I'm going, as I'm pressing down, I'm also sort of shifting the blade forward, and that helps to create just a really simple, even cut. And I would say that's probably plenty. If you're making ramen for a lot of people, I would say like 4 or so, you probably want to use that whole thing. This is just going to be for me, and so this is going to be plenty. All right. Cool. So that's all done. So far, nothing too terribly complicated. What's also sort of nice in a ramen is really thin pieces, just to stick with our onion theme, of shallot. And this is optional. You don't have to do this, but I find that the differences in flavor between a green onion and shallot are really nice. And I don't like a ton of shallot, but what I'm going to try to do is cut this as thin as possible so that I have these really nice, simple, even rings of a more allium flavor. And so I'm trying my best to keep these guys thin. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I'll do one more. And so what's nice is, hopefully you can see on this camera a little bit better, but these spheres just sort of pop out of each other, and you kind of can top that in your ramen too, and it adds a really nice flavor. I'll set these off to the side as well. Cool. So my garlic's about done, and I'm gonna give it one more little toss with my spatula. And I'm gonna lower the heat basically all the way to low. And so one of the reasons I'm doing that is to help slow down the cooking process, because I don't want charred garlic. And the other reason is because I'm going to be adding in chili flakes. And so this is the same kind of chili flakes, hope you can see over here, that you get at like pizza restaurants that you sprinkle on top of your pizza. I find that when you cook these in like even a warm oil, a lot of that capsaicin, that spicy flavor that is in peppers and chilies, leaches out into the oil. And so if you're not a big fan of spicy things, you can omit this altogether, or cut the amount of the chili flakes in half. I believe I have a half teaspoon. I'll have to check the recipe. But you can kind of adjust this to your favorite kind of spicy level, or none at all. And so I'm going to add this in here now. Just set that off and give it a quick mix. And you'll see the color of the oil change fairly quickly. It'll have more of this red hue to it. And that is partially the capsaicin that's leaching out, but also some of the polyphenols and flavonoids that are in the pepper. That's looking good. So now to that, I'm sure you can see here, I have a big old plate of shelled edamame. And so when you go to Asian restaurants or even sushi restaurants, a lot of times you'll see the edamame pods where it kind of looks like a bean pod. And those can be seasoned either just with like some salt, or like you'll see today where it's more spicy and kind of garlicky. And so I really like the shelled ones, just because I don't like to, when you consume the pods, just to drag it through your teeth and then you have to throw something away. To me, that's just sort of messy, but if you like that experience, you can totally do it. I had a bag of frozen edamame that I just put in some boiling water or a light simmering water for about 5 minutes, or just till I could puncture it really simply with a fork. And so I'm going to toss this into the pan I have behind me with the chili flakes and the garlic. Fantastic. And then I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. And I'll go into just a moment why I really like using tamari specifically whenever a recipe calls for soy sauce. But I'm going to go ahead and add this in there now. Cool. I'm going to mix it up and probably raise the temperature just a bit. Yeah, this looks great. Are there any questions so far?
Nothing yet in the chat, but if anyone has a question, please feel free to pop it in there.
Sounds good. All right, and I think, what else do we have left? So I have here a big old thing of bok choy. I also had a difficulty finding baby bok choy. And so this is what a large adult version of bok choy looks like. It's a very mild flavor. It kind of, to me, is a mixture between like lettuce and chard, but not as bitter as chard. And so I'm just going to use one leaf just because this bok choy is so big. A baby bok choy is like half this size. It's not this big at all. And so I like the crunch of this when having it in a ramen. It's something to chomp on. And so I'm just going to cut it in half here. And I'm going to place that in my bowl. And then to this as well, I found these at the store and I think they're so fun. They're basically like pre-cooked ramen noodles, like you don't have to do anything to them. And they're more of like a udon style noodle. And I believe that these are gluten-free. And so I don't personally eat gluten-free, but I like to experiment with that just so that I know when I'm working with people who have dietary restrictions, how to incorporate different diets or different ingredients. And so this is a brand that I find that I really like, and you don't have to do anything to. A traditional ramen noodle is, it sort of looks like a really long matchstick, and it's made from, I believe, flour, and I think there might be egg in there, and that's it. So it's almost like a pasta. But there's lots of different kinds of noodles that you can have with ramen. It's really difficult to mess it up. And so I'm just gonna pour this one just entirely in there. And you can see already, like it's super malleable. And I don't have to do anything to it, which is right in my book. I love that. So to this as well, we are going to add in a tablespoon of soy sauce, or I'm using tamari. And so in traditional ramen, this is a kind of shoyu ramen, and shoyu is the traditional soy sauce essentially, and it's made from wheat and soybeans. And what happens is they'll mash those up into a paste, and they'll let that ferment from anywhere from like a handful of months to years. And when they go to press that, similar to how you would press and extract oil from olive oil, that juice from that fermented mash of the wheat and the soybeans is what creates soy sauce, or shoyu. And the difference between tamari and shoyu is tamari doesn't have any wheat, so it's also gluten-free. And the benefit of that is it's completely made from soy, and the wheat flavor has, I believe, more of like a sweet variable in the soy sauce. But a lot of the umami comes from the soybean and not the wheat. And so I find that whenever I want to really zhuzh up my Asian meals, working with tamari is something that's absolutely worth the investment. And so what that also means is the soy sauces that we see at the grocery store, if they don't say shoyu or if they don't say tamari, a lot of times it's like a diluted shoyu with like some dye and some like extra sodium and maybe some vinegar. So I would encourage you guys to flip to the ingredients list on your soy sauces and just kind of do a check to see what it's made out of. And if you feel adventurous, you can grab a shoyu or grab a tamari off the shelf, and it's a really good time. A brand that I really like is Sanjay, and it's really good quality. I find that it works really well with a lot of my meals that I make. And so I'm going to add into this 1 tablespoon of tamari. Cool. And I'm really smelling my aromatic oil. I'm gonna give that a light stir again. It's probably done, so I'll cut the heat. And I'm pretty sure my edamame is done too. I'm gonna let it hang out for just a little bit longer. I want more of that soy sauce to evaporate off. I don't want like a little bit of soup that comes with the edamame. But what I will do for you guys right now is strain off this aromatic oil. And so, you know what, I'm probably gonna let it cool down a little bit before I pour it into a container. That seems like a smart move to make. So while that's happening, I'll move this off to the side that you can see a little bit better. I'm going to take that bowl, that pot I have behind me with the 1 cup of broth and the quart of water. So just be careful, you can see the steam, not to burn yourself. What I'll do is I have just a hand whisk here, and then I also have just a mesh strainer. And so to this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add to it and whisk in some miso paste. And there's different kinds of miso. There is white, yellow, and red. And the red has the most bold flavor, and the white and yellow, oftentimes they're exchanged for the same thing, name-wise. It's more of a milder flavor. And similar to how you would make soy sauce, you mash up soybeans to make miso and you let that ferment as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to spoon into here, just eyeballing it, about 2 tablespoons or so of miso paste. And if you were just to plop this into this paste into the pan already, it has a tendency to stick together. It likes to clump and stay in its form. And so if you don't have a strainer like this, what you could do is in a smaller bowl, take a fork or a whisk and try to mash that up with just like a cup or so of liquid, and then add that into your broth. I'm gonna rinse off my fingers real quick. But I find that this method works really well. And so I'm just gonna lightly submerge it into here and just whisk it around so I can break up a lot of the components in there. And all of it won't strain through the mesh strainer. And so you'll have these little bits of essentially soybean in it, and that's absolutely fine. And then you're actually just gonna dump everything into the pan. And so you can see this is what's sort of left over. These are the small chunks of soybean that I was talking about. And then I'm going to give this just a light shake so I can get out most of this stuff. And that's it. I'm going to rinse this off real quick.
Cole, we do have a question in the chat asking what the shelf life of miso is and where you buy it.
Yes. So this miso brand is Organic Mellow Miso by West Gray Natural. And there's a few brands out there, but you can get it at most grocery stores. It usually likes to hang out in the section that is next to the pickles or the fermented foods. I find it a lot of times either at Whole Foods or Safeway. I haven't seen it at Harris Teeter, but I also haven't like actively looked for it there either. But what's great about miso is it's really soothing to the stomach and the gut. And so I believe, there's so many amino acids. There's a kind of amino acid in there. I think it is glutamine that helps to essentially, when you have an upset stomach, to heal a lot of your intestinal lining. And so this is kind of like the chicken soup, but for Japanese culture. And so if you pour in a cup of chicken stock in here, you're gonna have, even more of those homey qualities. It lasts in the fridge for quite a while because it's fermented, but what you wanna do is, a lot of times the good ones will have just like this plastic liner. And so after I'm done here, and I'll just do it now so you can see, you wanna press this on top of the surface of your miso paste. And so this is what it looks like without it. And I'm just going to lightly press it so that it covers all of the surface area on the top. And that helps to keep the shelf life nice and stable. And so I've had this one for, I think, 2 months or so, but I would say just follow the expiration date on there and you'll be fine. Does that answer that one?
I think so.
Okay, cool. So my miso is all done. This can be a soup by itself. It's also traditionally served you can garnish it with some of these green onions that we have here. It also is served with tofu. You can add in really anything you like. It's a super mild broth. And so for me, I don't necessarily always have this one for a meal because it's not super filling, but I like to have it on hand so I can just pour it in a mug and sip on it either in the evening or the morning. And it's like a really simple, easy way for my digestive system just to kind of warm up. And the flavor is really nice too. Like, I really love salty things. I think I've mentioned that before. And this is like just the right amount of salty for me in the morning that just kind of like warms me up when I don't necessarily want to be like jolted awake by a cup of coffee. Miso is a fun way to go. And so this is what it is. You can ladle it into a mug. You can have it as an entire dish or meal if you'd like. You can add all sorts of fun things to it. But the miso is done. And I'm going to set this back on the stove so I can work with a little bit more room. And so now we're ready for our aromatic oil. I had a bowl somewhere that I was going to use. Oh, here it is. And so what I'll do is use the same strainer and just set it on top of there. And I'm going to drain the ginger and the green onion so that the oil comes out. And so if you know that you're making lots of ramen or it's a whole meal for a handful of people, you want to use, of course, more oil, but also more ginger and more green onion. And again, try to stick with the white parts of the onion so a lot of that flavor gets out. I'm gonna give this just a light press so we get out all of that fantastic tasting and smelling oil. I think that's pretty darn good. So we'll save this in just a moment. And I think the next thing that we'll do, because we're basically done here, I'm going to add to it an egg. And traditionally, a soft boiled egg is what is sort of garnished with the ramen as well. And there's lots of different ways and theories on how to do that. For me, what works best is I'll have on a pot of boiling water, and it has to be like a fairly vigorous boil. I'll add in gently an egg or two, or however many people that you're serving. So 1 egg per person usually does it well. And if you let it hang out in the boiling water for right around 8.5 minutes, it has sort of that like very soft, slightly runny yolk. If you want more of a done yolk, let it hang out for another minute or so. So I would probably let it stop in the boiling water like max at 10 minutes. I'd probably personally let it hang out at like 9.5 or 9. And then once that's done, immediately submerge it into ice water. And it's going to stop the cooking process, but it's also going to partially congeal the yolk of the egg so that if it is slightly runny, it kind of keeps its form a little bit more and it's more forgiving. And so I did these ahead of time before class. And so I'm just going to give them a very gentle smack and peel off the shell. Hopefully it turns out good. Looking fine. toss these bits.
We have another question, Cole, asking if miso soup can be frozen.
Oh, that's a good idea. I don't know, but I also don't see why not. Um, that would be really easy just to have on hand. If you give it a try, let me know. I suspect that it would hold pretty darn well, because just the ingredients are so simple. Like there's not a whole lot of like fatty components. Sometimes if there's a lot of protein or fat, um, that can, like the shelf life of something frozen diminishes quite a bit. But this is mainly honestly just water. And so I think it could be pretty darn stable in the freezer. So I would say go for it. And if you do, let us know. I think it should be totally fine. It's a good question. To this, I think what I'm gonna do now is just start to add everything together. So just as a reminder, we have some bok choy hanging out in here. We also have some ramen noodles, and we also have a little bit of that ginger paste that you saw me make, as well as 1 tablespoon of soy sauce or shoyu or tamari, whichever you want to use. It just depends on like how intense you want to elevate your ramen. And I really like the salty component, so sometimes I'll add in like another tablespoon of soy sauce, but I'm just going to leave it at 1 for today. And so what I'll do is I'm just going to ladle in my broth here until it just covers the noodles. And I'll do that real quick. And the mushrooms are already reconstituted. They look like normal mushrooms, which is kind of cool. One more. Awesome. So to this, what I will do, try to make it all nice and presentation worthy. I'm going to add in some of that really thinly sliced shallot on one side. And so a lot of times you'll plate, or I guess in this case, bowl a ramen, you'll organize it sort of into sections. And so with this egg, we'll hopefully see that it's a soft-boiled yolk. Oh my gosh, okay. This is one of my best eggs. I'll try to show you on the camera. So what you're kind of looking for is you can see the yolk is cooked right on this outer edge, and then the inside is sort of that like just barely done, where it still kind of has that vivid orange color. And so that is going to hang out on this side over here. And then I'll sprinkle in some green onion over in this section. A little bit more. I like green onion. And then you don't have to do this, but I find it's really fun. This is called a seaweed snack. They're these little packets of toasted seasoned seaweed. And so I believe all that's on here is a little bit of sesame oil, some salt, and it's just really lightly toasted on both sides. And it looks ridiculous, right? Like it looks like a sheet of paper. But the flavor is really, really yummy. It's fantastic. And it's salty, and it's also partially sweet. And so a lot of times you'll see these hang out in the side of your ramen bowl. And some people like to even add in a pickled element. If you have like a cornichon, those mini pickles, sometimes those are really fun just to like slice up at an angle and to sprinkle those in there. You can also do like a little bit of kimchi. You can do like a pickled onion, pickled cabbage, pickled anything would be like another sort of fantastic texturally and flavorful element to add to your ramen. So also what we're going to do is I'm going to add in just a little drizzle of my aromatic oil. Not too much because it is fairly bold. That is a lot of flavor. Holy cow. It's good though. And it's also kind of smoky, which is interesting. And another thing that I think is absolutely worth the purchase, and it's not too expensive, is a toasted sesame oil. And sesame in general is not something that you necessarily want to cook things with. And if you do, you sort of add it in last second to your dishes. The flavor of this is like next level. Like it kind of takes your cooking from like just like a hobby, and then you'll like taste it and your guests are gonna be like, oh my gosh, like what is in there? A lot of times, especially in Asian dishes, toasted sesame is like what sort of creates that last like zing, that big wow factor. And so I'm just gonna do a really light drizzle of this toasted sesame. It costs about $4 at Whole Foods for this size. Otherwise, if you get like a big bottle of it, it gets kind of pricey. And so this size lasts me quite a while because I just use it as like a finishing oil. And I think that's it. That's the ramen. And you can see hopefully on this camera really well. I'd show this front one, but it would just spill out. And then we're also done with the edamame, and I'll pour some back on that plate. You guys can see quick. Fabulous. And so this edamame is kind of course it's garlicky, but it's also kind of spicy. And so what you can do too is maybe do just like a small turn of some fresh cracked pepper. And if you're really feeling like a good time, I have some flaky salt here. And it's just big salt flakes that have been sort of cracked and broke open. But a lot of times you'll see this kind of a salt. It's a finishing salt. You don't necessarily use it for cooking, but it's more used for the texture. So you can like chomp on it. It's a texture thing. And also a visual because it looks so pretty. And I'll show you on this camera a little bit better. Hopefully you guys can see. And that's it. So today we made a really simple ramen, and it's very filling, and it's like just so comforting too. I love ramen, especially on like a cold, windy night. This is a great appetizer. Edamame there's a lot of soy happening today, I'm finding, but it's really fantastic and easy. And then also the miso is nice to sip on too. So that was the class. Do you guys have any questions at all before we wrap up?
We do have a question in the chat. What do you serve with the edamame?
Served with the edamame. So I just eat it by the spoonful. And so a lot of times at restaurants, if they're in that bean, you just grab them with your hand and then you sort of like pinch it between your teeth, and these little pods pop out in your mouth. So this is just how you would serve it. You don't have to do it shelled like I use, but I just don't like the hassle of going through the pods myself. So I will just eat this with like a fork or a spoon. And if you want to serve it with something, you can serve it with the miso or the ramen.
I have a question.
Okay.
For the noodles, if you have to watch your carbohydrates or sugar, can you recommend some kind of noodle?
Yes, actually. I'm going to go get it because I have it in my pantry. 1 second. Well, I thought I had it. This is kind of, I just want to check quick because that's such a good question. Oh, this one's not a good one. So what you can kind of look for, there is a kind of potato noodle that, even though it's carbs, a lot of it is fiber. And so if you're watching your carbohydrates or sugar intake, if you find something, so if you look on the nutrition facts panel, a lot of times you'll see like a number that says total carbohydrates, and let's say that it's like 30. And then underneath that, it will have listed fiber. And so whatever amount of fiber that is, you can subtract it from your like net carbohydrates or that total carbohydrate number, because fiber is undigestible. And so that's just passing through you, and you're not absorbing it, and it's not being broken down into sugar at all. And so another one that I look at that you should look out for is a rice noodle. I believe like a vermicelli noodle doesn't have, just because there's not a whole lot in there, and it's like mainly, forget like the cellulose molecule exactly. But sometimes a handful of those are really low carbohydrates. And so I would look out for, if you have in your grocery store, ask if they have like a gluten-free section or like a specialty like natural food section, and see there's lots of different kinds of noodles. There's also, I don't know that you'll necessarily like it flavor-wise, but there's a kind of kelp noodle that I think could work really well. It just has like a little bit more of a seaweedy flavor. It's not strong at all, but the color sort of is off-putting, like it's this really deep, sometimes like black or green, sort of like murky looking noodle, and that kind of like scares people. But it's actually insanely nutrient dense, and there's not a lot of carbohydrates in that. But always feel free to like, flip it to the back and see if you can do that quick math of subtracting the fiber from the total carbohydrates. And you can kind of use that as a tool to gauge whether or not that's a noodle that you would like to use. So again, as a summary, look for like a potato noodle, a rice noodle in some capacity, or if you're really feeling kind of fun and adventurous, look for a kelp noodle. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a good question.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or to pop it in the chat box. Okay, well, if not, again, thank you, Kole, for another great class. I am inspired to go out and get some stuff to make ramen and miso now. Okay, so I just want to let everyone know this class will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. We have already posted a couple of Kole's past programs, and we're going to be working on getting the rest up as well in the next week or two. This program is sponsored by the Friends of Beatley Library, and if you're interested in supporting programs like this, please consider joining or donating to the Friends of Beatley Library at beatleyfriends.org. And also, most of you are probably aware, but the library has moved back to the phase 2 of our reopening, meaning we're only offering curbside and virtual services, which you can find at alexlibraryva.org/virtual. We offer digital books, digital music, digital magazines, online classes, research databases, and a whole host of virtual programs like this one. So yeah, and the next class is January. Do you remember, Kole, what the date is?
I'm sort of, because it was supposed to be, so we switched from this class was technically supposed to be, I believe, on the 9th, and we shifted it to today, the 2nd. And so I think I'll have to chat with you. I don't know if I should pick up where that would leave off. So I believe that's either in 3 weeks.
It says January 23rd on the confirmation email that I got when I registered.
Gotcha. Okay. So the 20, I'm cool with the 23rd, or if we just like shift it 2 weeks, I believe that's still.
It'd probably be easiest just to do it since it's already
on there.
On there, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, also, the recipe is available for this one that I believe is being sent out. So we're starting to do that again because that was a request.
Yes. So once this ends, I'm going to go ahead and email the list, and you'll have the recipes for this, and we'll do that moving forward as well. We do have a comment in the chat, Kole. Thanks for broadening our culinary expertise and dietary consumption. Great class as always.
Thank you.
All right. So on that note, I think we'll go ahead and call it a day. So thanks, everyone, and have a great 2021.
Absolutely. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for coming.